If you've ever wondered about the role food plays in your faith, you're not alone. The Bible is full of references to food as both physical sustenance and spiritual nourishment. Verses like John 6:35 remind us that Jesus is the bread of life, satisfying spiritual hunger. And Psalm 1007:9 speaks to God's provision for those who are hungry, both physically and spiritually. Deuteronomy gives us specific instructions about food, like eating only fish with fins and scales. These rules remind us to follow divine guidance in our choices. John chapter 6 tells us that Jesus is the bread of life. This verse speaks of spiritual nourishment beyond just physical food. Romans chapter 14 tells us about acceptance in food choices. It encourages unity among believers despite differences in dietary practices. Matthew chapter 6 reminds us that God provides for all his creatures. Just like how birds are cared for, we are too. This is where it all began, showing God's provision beyond just food. Deuteronomy gives us clear instructions about what to eat, like only fish with fins and scales. But Romans 14 teaches us acceptance among believers when it comes to food choices. It's about unity and respect for each other's practices. John 6:35 speaks about Jesus being the bread of life, satisfying our spiritual hunger. Matthew 6:26 reminds us that God provides for all his creatures, just like he does for birds. This is where it all began, the inspiration behind our modern-day practice. Romans 14:33 teaches us to accept others' food choices, promoting unity within diverse practices. And while we eat bread, we remember the spiritual nourishment it symbolizes. Matthew 6:26 reminds us that God cares for all his creatures, providing for us just as he does for birds. This reassures us of divine care, not just in physical sustenance, but in spiritual fulfillment too. So as we eat, let's remember the deep connection between food and faith. In Romans 14:3, we're reminded that believers should accept one another regarding food choices. This teaches us to respect diverse practices within the community. Eating together strengthens bonds. So let's embrace this unity as we gather around the table. Deuteronomy 14:9-10 teaches us to eat only fish with fins and scales, showing God's instructions for our diet. This guides us on what to include in our meals, ensuring we follow divine guidance. But it's also about respecting others' choices to us. So embrace unity at your table, respecting all dietary choices. John 6:35 tells us Jesus is the bread of life, satisfying our spiritual hunger. This teaches us that food isn't just physical sustenance, but also a symbol of divine provision. Matthew 6:26 reminds us God for all, like birds in the sky, teaching us to trust. So remember, food connects us with God's care and each other. Deuteronomy 14 guides us on what to eat, like only fish with fins and scales. These instructions teach us to follow divine guidance in our food choices. So let's embrace unity and respect in diverse practices. Matthew 6 reassures us that God provides for all his creatures, including us. This message reminds us of divine care beyond just physical sustenance. So let's reflect on the spiritual nourishment food offers us. Psalm 1007 highlights God's provision for those who are hungry. John 6 emphasizes Jesus as the bread of life, satisfying spiritual hunger. Romans 14:4 teaches us to respect diverse food practices among believers. Matthew 6 reassures us that God provides for all his creatures. These biblical verses speak to the heart of faith and community. The eat only what's holy crowd and the anything goes crowd are both wrong. Here's the real picture. The Bible teaches us about God's provision and unity among believers. It's important to respect others' choices while staying true to our faith. So, finding peace in our food choices is part of this journey of faith. In the Bible, food isn't just about sustenance. It's a symbol of God's care. Verses like John 6:35 remind us that Jesus is the bread of life, fulfilling spiritual needs. Romans 14:3 changes unity. So, food in the Bible teaches us about God's provision and unity. Remember, this is where it all began, using food to strengthen faith and community. If that brings peace to your mind, I've got one more topic on